Hello, everyone. I am so happy to be here with you and to introduce you to the Fund for Research on Childhood Learning in Preschools. I'm Filomena Siqueira. I am Director of Projects at Bracell Foundation. And before we get started, let me just describe myself for those with vision impairment. I'm a white woman. I have blonde hair, long hair. I'm wearing a black blazer and I am sitting in an office. This research fund is a partnership between FAPESP, Itaú Foundation, and Bracell Foundation. I'd like now to thank all the representatives of our partners who are here with us and the early childhood experts who will be joining us for this event, as well as everyone who has joined us for this session and who will be watching the recording later. Well, this research fund is here to help us to really build a stronger early childhood learning in preschool. We know that this is a particularly important moment in the development of our children. We have windows of opportunities that have long lasting impact, things that will impact this person throughout their lives and their journey through the educational system. We know that early interventions make a big difference. We also know through the literature that investment in early education gives us some of the best returns in terms of public policy. However, we know that little attention is given to early education. We need to make sure that we can provide high quality early education to all children. And that's why we are now launching this new research fund. FAPESP, Itaú Foundation, and Bracell Foundation have joined efforts to really support research that can help us strengthen preschool in Brazil. We will be investing more than 6 million BRL in research and in applied research to support us to improve early education. We know that this is crucial for our children and for our country. And this is why we're here to talk more about our fund, how it works, and what we are supporting. With that, introduce you to the representatives of the three organizations who have joined effort in this initiative so we can start our conversation. So I'm honored to introduce you to Professor Nina Ranieri. Nina Beatriz Stocco Ranieri is the professor of education in the University of São Paulo and representative of the São Paulo Research Fund. And welcome, Professor. Just 1 second. Let's see if we can hear Professor Ranieri. Oh, there we go. As I was saying, first of all, good afternoon to all of you with us. I am honored to be the first speaker in this panel. I want to thank Bracell Foundation and Itaú Foundation, who have been incredible partners in this initiative. I also want to thank those at FAPESP and all the researchers and guests who are with us for this meeting. I thank you for your time and effort. This webinar is important because it is a landmark for research in early education in Brazil. Now, I'd like to talk more about FAPESP. FAPESP, the São Paulo State Research Grant and Fund, is one of the most important fundraisers for research in Brazil. Throughout its history, FAPESP has built a strong foundation that is recognized both in Brazil and abroad based on our strong support to high quality research. FAPESP has the budget that represents 1% of all the income that we get from levy taxes in the state of São Paulo. And we provide grants to researchers who are associated to universities, research centers, public agencies, companies, and civil society organizations. And it's in this context that allow us to be here. But here we are launching a unique initiative. This is the first time in the history of FAPESP that we launch a call for proposals dedicated fully to early childhood education, given the strategic partnership with Bracell Foundation and Itaú Foundation. This is a very important moment in our history because we're not here only to fund research, but to truly strengthen the community of researchers that focus on preschools and look for applied research that connects to the challenges that public schools in Brazil face every day. We're talking about research that can have a real impact in the lives of those who work and study in these schools, impacting teaching practices and public policies alike. In that sense, the 10 research areas contemplated in this funding call reflect how important applicability is. We will be talking about the school management, curriculum, teaching practices, neuroscience and learning in early childhood, early numeracy, student assessment, professional development for educators, and including the relationship between schools, families, and communities. This call is here to support researchers with a PhD and who are associated with institutions in the state of São Paulo. For long-term research, we have focus areas that allow for funds for up to 5 years. And we also have short-term grants for regular research. We will give you further details about these different topics, but we accept proposals up to the 12th of July, and we will start to offer funding in 24 months, and we have a total budget of 6.4 million. As you can see, this is a very significant fund. And I want to say one more thing. Again, given how unique this call is, it is also being launched at a very important moment in time. And why is that? Because we are here to celebrate 2 decades of important progress in recognizing early childhood education as a fundamental right and a mandatory step in education. In 2023, in the Brazilian Supreme Court saw Justice Melo provide us a ruling where we now see the right to early childhood education as a fundamental right. There is a subjective right to that children up to the age of 5 have to be enrolled in preschool and daycares. This is before the constitutional amendment that incorporated early childhood education to mandatory education in public care system. The amendment was 2009 and the Supreme Court ruling was from 2006. Sorry. Given these 20 years that have passed, we see that early childhood education is not only seen as something that is inside a list of public policies, but actually as a fundamental right that requires scientific evidence, professional training, and institutional commitment. And this is precisely what this partnership between 3 institutions, FAPESP, Bracell Foundation, and Itaú Foundation, is now promoting. To wrap up my talk, I want to again emphasize the importance of this partnership, showing that this connection between science and institutions that promote citizenship and inclusion through education may lead to innovative answers to our struggles. And with that, I invite all the academic community to take part in this call and propose research that can strengthen early childhood education in Brazil. Again, I want to thank all of you for being here with us, and I wish you an amazing webinar. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Ranieri. Now, I hand it over to Patricia Mota Guedes, who is the superintendent of Itaú Social. Hello to all of you who have joined us today. Let me describe myself. I'm a white woman. I have dark brown hair that is shoulder length. I wear glasses, and behind me there is an open window, a very bright window. Well, I want to also thank all of you who have joined us in this webinar and those of you watching the recording and sharing with colleagues. I also want to thank our partners who are here represented by Professor Nina Ranieri and my dear colleague Eduardo Queiroz, Filomena. These are people who represent a joint effort between FAPESP and our foundation. FAPESP helps us to understand what is the North Star for us in research. With that, I'm very happy to see Professor Nina here with us. Yes, I agree with you. This is indeed a historic moment. This is the first time where we launch a grant that is fully focused on early childhood education. And I want to thank all the experts who will be joining us for this webinar and who have been working with early childhood education for decades, providing us with robust evidence. And this is crucial for human development more broadly. And what unites us here is this understanding that daycare and preschool are not just waiting rooms for formal education. Actually, these are crucial developmental years for our children where they learn a lot and we see opportunities but also challenges for the professionals that care for these children. We have made great strides in terms of access to early child education, but are still challenges related to equity and inclusion, as well as the quality of education that these children are getting. And this call for proposals will address these things directly. We want to see applied research that can help us to address these specific topics that are faced by preschools. And here at the Itaú Foundation, we focus on art, culture, and education. And applied research is seen as an important factor when strengthening civil society because it promotes open discussions and creates knowledge that makes sense when applied to our society, our daily lives, so that we can support our children to grow and develop healthily. We want to support policies, we want to support schools, and we want to make sure that we walk towards a universal access to high quality education in Brazil. We live in a country where we now have education framework legislation that provide opportunity for state departments to support local departments to in developing research and applied policies. And we know that we have some representatives here. And we know that in Brazil, states will play a very strong role in supporting research. And we are also developing the 10-year plan for education, where we know that the challenges faced by early childhood education is no longer seen as limited to access, but to different focus areas that we will be contemplating in this grant, in this call. So with that, I want to thank again the experts, the members of government, educators who are with us today. I want to thank the entire scientific community who has worked hard to improve early childhood education. We have already a very robust body of research, and we know that Professor Maria Malta is one of the greatest representatives of that research. But again, this call is here for us to really support relevant research and help those who have worked to help us improve early childhood education. With that, I want to thank you on behalf of Itaú Foundation, and I'm sure that this is going to be a very successful endeavor. Thank you. Thank you, Patricia. Then, moving on, I hand it over now to Eduardo de Campos Queiroz, the chairman of Bracell Foundation. Hello, everyone. I'm Eduardo Queiroz. As Filomena said, I am part of the Bracell Foundation. I'm a white man. I'm wearing glasses. I have hair that is now going gray, but it used to be dark brown. And now I want to thank our partners, FAPESP and Itaú Social, for their work here. I want to thank all the experts. I want to thank Míghian and Professor Maria Malta, who has worked hard for the development of early childhood education in Brazil. So it's an honor to have Professor Maria Malta with us today. And I also want to thank everyone who has joined us in this effort. Well, Professor Nina and Patricia have already covered many of what I wanted to share with you, but let me tell you a little bit more about Bracell Foundation and give you some context on this call. Bracell Foundation focuses on childhood education. The foundation was established in 2024, and we focus on evidence-based education. And we know that when it comes to early childhood education, research from Brazil and abroad have shown that there is huge inequality that starts from early in a child's life. And when a child goes to preschool, when a child goes to daycare, this represents a crucial moment in their development. We know that high quality early childhood education will make a big difference in the life of children, especially in vulnerable communities. Brazil still faces many significant gaps, and one of the reasons why we are launching this grant fund, which is the first of its kind at FAPESP, is very important. And FAPESP has played an incredible role in setting up this fund. They bought into it from the very first days and truly embraced it. Itaú Foundation did the same. And what we're trying to do is to see research that can help us to implement large-scale initiatives and policies to help children in Brazil. And we want to adapt things to our reality because we know that what works for Finland might not work for Brazil. So we need local research. Of course, if there are models and frameworks that work abroad, they should be tested in Brazil to see whether they help our children or not, but also local knowledge. And we also need to learn how to translate scientific evidence into public policy, how applied research can support us in making sure that preschools now are truly appreciated for what it does. As mentioned before, we will be focusing on preschools and early childhood education. And there's one more thing. We're not here only to support theoretical data. This is something that all the three uh, institutes here have agreed on. We want research that can help the decision makers, that can help the public policy makers to really design better policies based on robust research. This is truly important. It is important for academia to work closely with policymakers so that we can start to design evidence-based policies. This is crucial. And now we urge the community of researchers to understand that we're looking for research that can help us to truly improve early childhood education. And we invite any institution that wants to join efforts with us to do so. We are here also to support researchers who have worked in more theoretical fields to build bridges with the lives of teachers and educators. And we know that with this partnership, we will be able to produce applied research. So that's what we're doing here. We want to really shed some light into early childhood education so we can build a better future for all our children. Filomena has already mentioned that here at Bracell Foundation, we believe that investing in early childhood is investing in the future of Brazil. And this is an investment that really yields the best returns. And we also believe that good public policy needs to be evidence-based. With that, we count on all of you. We hope that you submit your proposals, and if this fund is successful, we expect to renew it for future years. With that, thank you so very much, and I wish you all good luck. Thank you, Eduardo. Now, I am truly honored to introduce you to Professor Maria Malta Campos, who will tell us more about the importance of early childhood education. Professor Maria Malta is a former professor of PUC São Paulo and a senior researcher at Carlos Chagas Foundation and a member of the scientific committee of the Nucleus for Early Childhood Research. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you for the kind introduction and for all the love shared by all the previous speakers. I am very happy to have been invited to be part of the launch of this call. It comes at great time, and it is going to be incredibly important, not only to the state of São Paulo, but to Brazil more broadly. And I believe that FAPESP participation, as mentioned before by Professor Nina Ranieri, is going to play a crucial role in the sense that FAPESP has already made huge contributions to Brazilian scientific endeavors, and science is very important not only for Brazil, but of course globally. And I am very happy to see this partnership between Bracell Foundation that opted to invest in early childhood and FAPESP that brings the scientific rigor to this project. FAPESP has always supported the natural sciences and also the humanities as well as education. And I'm here to tell you a little bit about the importance of early childhood education and how this has been addressed, especially in the early developmental years before children were formally enrolled in schools. Well, we should be reminded that São Paulo actually has a very beautiful history when it comes to early childhood education. It all starts with Mário de Andrade, who was a very well-known author here in São Paulo. He was the Secretary of Culture at the time in the early 1930s. And he developed this initiative called Parques Infantis that for many decades were institutes where children in preschool ages could go, and this was a public service offered to families. And these were parks, and many were implemented in small areas of larger public parks and was a place where young children could go to. And Mário de Andrade was inspired by German education models that fostered contact with nature. This unfortunately was lost in subsequent years here in Brazil, but this was a very important initiative. I started to work in education at a time where people had a specific thought similar to the one that we're promoting here today. That was in the 1970s. And in 1970s, Professor Ana Maria Popovic, who was very well known in the field of early uh, early literacy, started to research education with the support of uh, Carlos Chagas Foundation and Ford Foundation. The Ford Foundation was important to provide funding for long-term research, and that research was done with focus on early childhood literacy training. Here we are talking about children who were between 4 and 6 years old, which was preschool at that time, and were children who had been previously served by the Parques Infantis by Mário de Andrade. That research showed that there was a big gap both in terms of the curriculum and in the teaching practices that were used at the time. And they and we saw that there was different levels of success between different teaching practices. And that's how I entered into the research field, applying different methodologies to research their success. And then as we saw uh, the 80s entering the field, we saw this important movement called the daycare access movement, the daycare rights movements. And they covered years that included preschool school because it went up to the age of 6. And it was a very important civil movement led by women who worked in the public sector. And this movement was important because it helped to inform our society on the importance of these early childhood interventions and the needs that families had. Many family members, they fought for access to early childhood education before the age of 6. And we learned a lot from these movements. Here on the slide, you can see that this daycare rights movement was focused on São Paulo, Belo Horizonte, and Rio de Janeiro, but of course it spread to northeastern Brazil, southern Brazil, especially in Rio Grande do Sul. So this was a very broad national movement, and it truly helped us in future endeavors because it showed the importance of early childhood education. Then, with the new democracy, we were able to achieve many victories, we can call them, especially in the early year 2000, some of which have been mentioned here already. But by late 1990s, even in the late 80s with the new constitution, then the National Educational Framework Law, and the fact that education starting at the age of 4 became mandatory had a very big impact in the education of Brazilian children, and children between the age of 0 and 3 in daycare started to be addressed as preschool institutions. And we saw also that there was a larger focus on teacher training and changes in early childhood curriculum. So as you can see, we made great strides in terms of uh, developing a legal framework and providing funds to institutions dedicated to children in their early developmental years. So it's important for us to look back at everything we were able to achieve. I know that these took place a few decades back, but in any case, these were great victories. However, it is also important to remember that research continued to show that we had very big gaps on the education children were receiving. And the current call can help us a lot because we have learned from what we have done before, and now we should have research to show us where to go next. And this is where this funding call will make a big difference. And what are some of the major challenges that we currently face? Well, we have seen excessive early literacy training without the requirements for that. We focus on actually offering formal education to children in very early years instead of thinking about something that fit them better. Something else that is important is we have part-time and full-time daycares, but let's say you have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. They go to different daycares. Often one is part-time, the other is full-time. And how can you manage that as a mother, right? Another problem is lack of oversight. And here I want to particularly highlight one of the topics that I know is going to be one of the focus areas of the funding call, which is teacher training. Teacher training has not evolved in recent years. Actually, it has gotten worse. We are now facing very severe constraints. And why is that? There are many explanations for that. There has been a big movement to privatize teaching training programs. We have also allowed, actually, let me rephrase that. We have now accepted remote training without the need for supervised practices and without the exposure to real world settings. So now we see a huge number of teaching training programs that are done online and that are very poor in quality. We need to look at what is now going on, even in medical schools, because we see the same thing now taking place in medical schools. Look at that medical schools, I say. And they now rely more and more on remote settings. And we see the same taking place in teacher training programs. And regardless of how old the children that teacher will be teaching are, whether they are preschool children or children slightly older, this has a big impact in the quality of education that these children get. And this is a big challenge that we are now facing. And I have seen that this grant call has listed teacher training and professional development of educators as one of the focus areas. And I am very happy to see it here because I would love to see it being prioritized. Another thing I wanted to mention here before I wrap up my talk, because I know that there's a lot for us to share here today. And again, I am here if you want to talk to me about it. I'm always at your disposal if you want to contact me. But I worked with two colleagues from the Federal University of Minas Gerais who also study education, Lívia Franca Vieira and Vanessa Neves. And we have now just submitted a chapter for a book that is being organized by Australian professors Rob Perry and his colleague Susan. Oh, sorry, I don't have her surname. I don't know how to pronounce it, but I will let you know in writing later. But they are part of this institution in Australia where they are studying early childhood education and other school-related topics. And they are now organizing a book for Springer covering 39 countries where English is not the main language. The idea of this book is precisely to study the global south and more specifically non-English speaking countries like Brazil, because these are countries that are often neglected in these big research efforts. So I was invited to represent Brazil, and I was happy to work with Lívia and with Vanessa to write this chapter. And Vanessa had studied a very interesting topic in her PhD. Her PhD thesis was she investigated a group of children in Belo Horizonte from preschool to the first year of formal education. These were children in the public education system of the city of Belo Horizonte. And she saw a big paradox. Children who are in preschool, they are anxious to learn how to read and write. They are very happy to learn so. But the teacher, sorry, did not was not able to seize on that opportunity because she had to follow the curriculum that was very strict. And when these children then go into the first year of formal education, instead of building on top of what children had learned in preschool, the teacher looked at those kids as if they had never learned anything in their lives before. So there was no communication between the two systems. So Vanessa investigated this transition and we looked at all the literature on this area. We found 38 papers and 73 PhD theses. And what did we find when analyzing the results of these different articles and of all that research. Research coming from many different states in Brazil. We found this mismatch between the different institutions in our educational system, especially when it comes to how they help children behave and develop. What we mean is, what Vanessa found in her PhD thesis was then validated by the systematic review, meaning that the school system does not support children in their learning when they show curiosity for a given topic and does not take into consideration what children have learned prior to entering school. Another thing that we found was three key friction points. One is between play and literacy, as if they were not compatible, as if you could not use play to help children learn to read and write. The second friction is between free movement and immobility. When children are shown to be very active, we try to contain that children physically, and children are given very few opportunities to move. And finally, we see this friction between joy and fear. We saw very interesting research showing, and actually this was one that was funded by a municipal school system. We know that children often shown a fear of moving from one setting to the other because in preschool they felt they experienced joy, but they were afraid of the contentions and the limitations from the first year of formal school. So this work emphasizes the fact that the concept of care, one that has been widely discussed in daycare rights movements, this idea of care should also be taken into consideration when designing education policies, and we believe that our education institutes should look into that. Now, recent legislation has shown that changes are imposed onto schools in a way that does not set them up for success. Teachers are not trained to support younger children. When education became mandatory starting the age of 6, teachers were not ready for that audience, and there were some there were some cities in Brazil where these teachers were even now handling children as young as 4. In schools, they added all the children into formal education because that would raise their numbers of school enrollment and therefore the funds that they get from the federal government. But basically, these are some of the challenges. If you want to learn more, I can share the articles with you later. And I also want to say that I believe teaching, training is one of the key topics here. Because if we think about all the focus areas that are covered by this grant call, you will see that if teachers are not well trained, And not only in terms of what they have to teach, but also how to teach, we won't be able to offer good education. That's why it's also important for us to exercise greater oversight on the institutions that currently train teachers, because people pay to be trained and they receive very poor training. And then when they have to handle a room with 25-year-olds, 7-year-olds, they're not ready for that. And it's totally understandable because it is not easy to handle such a large room with such young children. And just by hearing what it would be like in a remote setting is not enough. So I would say that this is something that lies at the foundation of everything else. So I would urge you to focus on this research area. Of course, there are many others that are touched by teacher training. And again, now let me just say that I am sure that this is going to be a very successful initiative. FAPESP has vast experience in supporting research at the state of São Paulo, and we would be happy to see this call for proposal announced in the public universities of Brazil, like Unesp, Unicamp, USP. I think it's important for researchers in all these institutions to be aware of this call for proposals, but I'm sure that Bracell Foundation will make a big impact with their investment. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Malta. It's an honor to have you with us today. And now I am happy to introduce you to Professor Míghian Danae, our next speaker. She's a professor of Unilab who who studies in São Francisco do Conde campus, and she's the coordinator of research on Black childhood. Thank you and good afternoon. Well, let me start by also thanking the organizers for inviting me to be here. I'm very happy to join you. I'll also describe myself. I am a Black woman. I'm wearing glasses that are red. I have dreadlocks in my hair. I'm wearing a brown top and I'm sitting and there is a white wall behind me. And I'm here to tell you a bit about how I see this topic. First is why preschool is so important. I know that this has been touched on by previous speakers, but I would like to reinforce that topic because preschool is crucial when we think about childhood education and policy making. And I will also touch on the topic of the big potential we have in strengthening public policy in early childhood education, meaning how evidence from research can help us to design better policies. I also think there's a current need to bridge the gap between academia and policymakers, which is something that I know that has already been mentioned, but I would like to detail it a bit more. And like Professor Maria Malta has done, well, she has been a professor to many of us, including those that she did not teach directly, because I know she was very important to me in my journey. But I want to share some examples of successful partnership between research and researchers and policymakers, so that I can help you to come up with ideas and encourage you to submit your proposals. First of all, why preschool? Why should we strengthen preschools? Well, The first years of a child's development are crucial, and we need to investigate it thoroughly so we understand where the research gaps are. What don't we know about early childhood development and how education plays a role in it? Because, as Professor Maria Malta mentioned, if we look at this history of early childhood education in Brazil, we learn about the fact that we need to actually look at how our society has perceived education, meaning how we understand the culture, how our culture sees early childhood. And this is only possible through robust research. And we are here to make significant contributions to understand what how early childhood impacts the social development of our children. And preschools should also be the object of debate because we need to talk about the fact that there's no difference between educate and care for children in preschool settings. And I think that if we think about how these two overlaps, this can come up as great research topics because we have things that are measurable, but others that are not so. And yet, these two need to be investigated in research, but we can only really access those topics and understand how to improve early childhood education and preschool education if we design careful research to address those challenges. Another thing that we can learn from learning about preschool is the fact that we talk a lot about play-based learning and other building blocks of preschool education. And these also require better detailed information so we know how to support children going to preschool. So let's say I want to study play-based interactions. That means we need to listen to what children have to say, listen to their voices as well. And here I want to talk a bit about how we've been doing research and ethics in human research. So we need to learn how to listen to children's voice if we are here to research early childhood development and education. And this is something that, of course, requires very careful research design. And now I will share three focus areas that I think are key. Professor Malta talked about teacher training, which is indeed very important to us when we talk about preschool education. But on top of that, I want to talk about three other focus areas that are important when we think about early childhood education and children development, especially if we want to hear children's voices. So I think that it is important and actually feasible for us to make progress in that understanding if we design research for that. But there's one more thing that I want to talk about here, which is how to help evidence-based policy making. Because I often wonder how we can make preschools better. I am utterly convinced that public policy can support us in developing early childhood education, but how can we design the best possible policies? How can we support policymaking through data and evidence to make sure that we design proper policies and improve those that have already been implemented. And we know that some changes they emerge through requests from the population, but in any case, we still need research to support those claims. I live in Bahia, and we here always say that we need to understand these are two different things, even though that they overlap. Because yes, there are things that emerge from civil movements and from demands from civil society, but even when addressing these demands, we need research to know how to fulfill these demands the right way. Research can support us to advance human and social rights, including in preschool settings. And this is something that could come from evidence-based policymaking. By better understanding preschool, we help to support policymaking for for young children. And I believe that this call for proposals invites us to think about those different topics. And one of the potential answers for how we can improve preschool is actually what this call is looking for, because this call is supporting research that can describe and address the problems that preschools face in Brazil. You can find more details about that in the website for this call, but this call is going to fund research that can describe gaps and address them so that we can generate impact on the Brazilian society. And we know that some of these changes may be addressed through policymaking. Therefore, there is a potential partnership between academia and policymakers so that we can make sure that we all work together to advance access to high quality early education. And we hope that the knowledge created through this call supports us in, as I mentioned, designing better policymaking. Now, if we talk more about this, about how to bridge this gap between academia and policymakers, I have to remind you all that academia is not detached from the rest of Brazilian society, even though it might sometimes seem so. I used to teach preschool kids for 15 years. Now I teach in higher education levels, and I can tell you that there is no higher education without early education. And what we study at university, of course, needs to connect to the urgent needs of our society. And a part of our research should precisely bridge this gap between universities and the broader society. So we hope that the proposals that are granted funds in this initiative to do precisely so. This call for proposals is looking for applied research that can help us develop processes, methodologies, or solutions that can be tangibly applied in education institutes that are part of Brazil's public education system. Meaning that we want research not only to support us in policy making or in improving current policies, but also help us develop processes, methodologies, and solutions that can be applied in schools. So this now connection between university and early childhood education, universities and policymaking, universities, and teaching practices is what this call is truly aiming to develop. So the idea is to help researchers to see that there is an avenue ahead of us to make our research have a direct impact in the quality of the education that our preschool children have. And now I would like to end by sharing some successful cases where this partnership between research and policymaking was able to be very fruitful. So the idea is to really encourage you in engaging into similar ideas by submitting your proposals to this grant. So, for example, when a policy was designed to secure positions in public universities for Black students and other minorities, this was done based on research. So there were social studies that supported this policy by providing evidence. Brazil has a historic debt to these populations. So how can we address this issue? So this policy was designed based on what we learned from research. And this policy has only survived so long because research has shown that after Black students were granted this right, they really started to make up a significant portion of university students in Brazil. And I believe that this was a very successful example of how evidence can support good policy making in Brazil. And now we have a 10-year example of particularly that. And now I want to share an example that is not as objective as my previous one, but that I think would be very relevant for our discussion today, because Professor Cavalera published a thesis on how Black children were cared for in their educational system. So this field work showed a significant difference, a measurable difference between how Black children were cared for versus how white children were cared for. Of course, this was not the first time this was investigated, but this was research that became very famous because it was even mentioned in newspapers and in publications that reach a non-academic audience. And this led to a new movement that allowed us to address this difference. And we also know that this research supported other researchers to engage in the same debate, so that now the national education guidelines include an item that refers to erasing racism from our educational settings. So yes, we know that this is a debate that is very important in teaching training and in the lives of our children from a very early age. And in 2024, we saw the parameters for education, and the name of this parameter, parameters of quality and equity in childhood education. And these are changes that emerged from evidence collected through research that investigated what kind of education we offer to our children and whether there was a difference. And again, we have to remember that what we do for our children. And yes, it is hard for us to show a direct link between research, that particular research, and the difference in policymaking, but we now know that it stirred debate that made it impossible for policymakers to ignore the racial element when thinking about education guidelines. And this is something that was built on top of 25 years of research. So when we talk about ethnicity and racial relations in education and everything we were able to achieve by investigating it, I hope you can see that the evidence produced has supported us to make advancements and that we might need additional research to help us address inequality in preschool education as well. So I hope that those of you with us today that you feel inspired in submitting your own proposals. And let me just say one more thing. This call is here to help us build the future together. We are the ones sowing the seeds of the future. We are responsible for building the world we want to see in the future. And the future is not stretched far ahead in time. The future starts now. So that's why we invite all of you to take part in this call of proposals. Thank you, Professor Danae. Now, Fernanda will tell us more about the call for proposals itself. With that, I hand it over to Fernanda Bionde, which is the head of partnerships at FAPESP. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Well, after such powerful talks, I'll now focus on the technical details of this call. But I want to start by saying that this funding call has a landing page, which is where we can find all the information that is relevant for this call. So here you know where to submit your proposal. So as you scroll through the website, you can see that there is a link, submit your proposal. And you will be redirected to SAG-E, which is the platform that FAPESP uses to assess proposals that are submitted. But this landing page also provides more detail on all the focus areas that are covered by this call. If you want to find more information, feel free to go onto our website. With that, if we can now switch to my slides, please. So we are here to talk also about the timeline for this grant. So for this call for proposals, of course, right? So if we can move on to my slides, as I mentioned before, here, there we go. Thank you very much. So you should submit your proposals by the 12th of June using the SAG-E platform. And there are different steps in each of these items. So let me give you more details, right? Because sometimes it feels like you submit a proposal and we never get back to you. You have to wait for months and you don't hear from us, but it's because there's a lot going on. First, we have an eligibility check. So our technical team will look at the documentation you have submitted. If you have sent all the documentation, then you will go to the next step. Otherwise, we may let you know what's missing. But so pay attention to what documents are required in the platform. Then we check whether you meet the criteria of the call. So there's going to be an assessment comparing your proposal to the focus areas that are covered by this call. If your research does not address one of the focus areas, then it won't be awarded the grant. Then we move on to the next step where we appoint ad hoc reviewers, meaning we send your proposal to experts in that particular topic so they can assess your proposal, and depending on how much money your research needs, you will have your proposal reviewed by 1, 2, or 3 reviewers. They offer an opinion, and those opinions are then sent to a group of FAPESP reviewers for a final decision. Decisions will be announced starting on October 16th. I say starting because we think that conducting a high quality process is important. If we think the opinion that reviewers have sent us does not give us all the information we needed to make a decision, we will have to ask more reviewers to look at your proposal. So we will do our best to announce the results on October 16th, but to us, the priority is to make sure that this analysis, that this decision is made the best way possible. Then we expect projects to start by the 1st of November, and we will require all projects granted the funds to send annual scientific reports and financial reports detailing how the funds have been used. And these are some of the focus areas. And again, remember that we will assess whether your proposal addresses any of the focus areas covered by the call. The first one is preschool management. Number 2 is curriculum and teaching practices in preschool. Number 3, neuroscience and learning in early childhood. 4, early numeracy in preschool. 5, student assessment in preschool. 6, professional development of educators who work in preschools. 7, inclusion and equity in preschools. 8, technology in preschool education. 9, best practice and education policy design. And 10th, relationship between school, families, and communities in preschool settings. So our reviewers, they will check whether your proposal addresses any of these focus areas. And of course, there are different dimensions covered across these focus areas. So these research topics have been carefully picked to make sure that we can address the different challenges that preschools face today. So who can apply for the grant? Well, FAPESP usually supports what we call regular research, and the regular research can be awarded up to 600,000 reais, 200,000 per year, up to 3 years. And you also have what we call the technical grant, which offers you funds for items that might not have been considered early on, some emergency funds that you may need, or let's say you may need funds for a particular event that was not mapped earlier. So this is an additional fund that you may apply for as part of that project. So the technical grant will not be deducted from the main grant. And who can apply for that kind of grant? A PI with a PhD who works for an institution of education and research in the state of São Paulo. As you know, FAPESP has funds that come from taxes levied in the state of São Paulo, so we can only support researchers who are associated with institutions in the state of São Paulo. Other researchers may benefit as long as they are working in partnership with a researcher in São Paulo. And then we have what we call thematic projects. These are large scale or highly complex research that aim to lead to higher impact. In this case, there is no maximum amount, and this project, the only thing is that the grant has an initial term of up to 36 months. So we need now to have a PI that can provide documentation that proves this person has experience in coordinating larger teams, given that these are larger scope research efforts. Our platform will offer more details on what documentation you can submit. In any case, if you have any questions about the call, submission of proposals, you can email us at chamada-fpe@fapesp.br. FPE stands for the name of this fund, and we strongly suggest that you do not wait until the last day to submit your proposal, because we know that sometimes our platform can maybe not be able to handle too many submissions at once. Thank you, Fernanda. Thank you for sharing all the details with us. And yes, the landing page is already online, and there is a link to the detailed call for proposals. This is the first launch. I'm sure that many of you are going to have questions, and we will add our frequently asked question tab when we get your questions. So we will be updating that landing page as we move forward. And now to wrap up this call, I'd like to invite to the stage Alexandre Moreira, who is the head of Itaú Social. Hey, I think you can hear me now, right? I was on mute. Sorry for that. Hello, everyone. I'm Alexandre. I am, well, a brown-skinned man. I have a beard. I'm wearing round glasses, and I wear a beige striped shirt. Behind me, there is a gray wall with colorful paintings showing abstract images. And I was tasked to wrap up this beautiful webinar. I'd like to start by thanking all of you who have joined us, those who have stayed with us until the very end. I want to thank all the speakers as well. We heard from Professor Nina, from Patricia and Eduardo, who talked first about how powerful this unique partnership is in helping us to support our scientific community. And it comes to show that This is not simply an academic choice, but it is truly a commitment to the future of our children and therefore our country. And then our guest speakers, Professor Maria Malta, Professor Míghian Danae, showed us how urgent it is for us to bridge this gap between academic research and the real world of our schools so that we can develop applied research that improve education. And finally, Fernanda showed us how we can submit our proposals, where we should go, and letting us know the different research topics that will be covered in this fund. And what comes to mind when I think about everything I heard here today, I know that Eduardo talked about the future, Míghian told us to sow the seeds of the future, and that reminded me of a quote by Gabriela Mistral, who is an educator and poet from Chile. And she says the future of our children is always today, tomorrow is already too late. So we hope that this call of proposals help us to address this urgent need so that we can transform the world based on evidence and scientific knowledge, again, so that we can improve the lives of our children today. I really hope that this call really honors this commitment so we can transform the lives of every single child in preschools in Brazil. And my final message to those of you with us today, researchers, educators, and managers, please send your proposals and let's get those ideas off the paper, build research networks and teams, and please spread the news. Let others know that now we have launched this call. We will be sharing with you the URL to our landing page, but please invite colleagues from your department, from your university, spread across the state of São Paulo. And again, stay tuned on social media. Both FAPESP, Bracell Foundation, and Itaú Foundation will be sharing more information about not only this call, but all our initiatives to strengthen early childhood education. With that, thank you so very much. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day, and let's make that research impact the teachers and students across Brazil. Thank you.